Welcome. Today, we're jumping into a chapter that, let's be honest, a lot of people see as just a long, kind of weird list of dietary rules. But Leviticus 11 is so much more than that. Think of it as a vivid, almost cinematic guide that was designed to teach an entire nation how to see the world in a completely new way. So let's get into it. First, we're going to look at the command that comes straight from the top. Then, we'll take a tour through the entire animal kingdom, starting on land, diving into the sea, and then looking up to the air. We'll also unpack the real-world consequences for breaking these rules. And finally, we'll uncover the ultimate reason behind this whole unforgettable food guide. Okay, let's dive right in. It's so important to get this from the start. This isn't just a list of good ideas or suggestions. This is a direct communication from the highest possible authority, and it sets the stage for everything that's about to unfold. Verse 1 immediately puts us in the room, making it crystal clear who's speaking. Then, in verse 2, you can almost picture the camera turning to Moses and Aaron as they prepare to address all of Israel. They're about to lay out a blueprint that's going to shape the rhythm of their daily lives. The scene is set for a whole new way of living. First up, we've got the animals that walk the earth. And you might be surprised to find out the system here is actually pretty simple. It's all based on two very clear physical signs that separate what's permitted from what's forbidden. So verse 3 gives us the rule, and it's like a divine checklist with just two boxes you have to tick. For an animal to be considered clean or okay to eat, it has to have a hoof that's completely split, and it has to chew the cud, regurgitating its food to chew it again. Think of a cow. Does it have a cloven hoof? Yep. Does it chew its cud? Check. Both boxes are ticked, so it's on the menu. Now, verses 4 through 7 give us some really specific examples of animals that fail this two-part test. First up, the camel. It definitely chews the cud, but just picture its foot. It's this big, soft, padded foot, perfect for the desert, but it's not a split hoof, so the camel is out. Then you've got the rock hyrax and hare. Their jaws are always moving, but their paws aren't cloven. They fail the hoof test. And finally, you get the pig, which is the perfect opposite example. It's got the split hoof for sure, but it doesn't chew the cud. It fails the second test, so it's also considered unclean. And then verse 8 delivers the bottom line, and this is so important. The command has two parts. It's not just don't eat them, it's also don't even touch their dead bodies. This introduces a huge theme for the rest of the chapter. These laws are creating a separation, not just in their diet, but in how they interact with the world, and it all points to something much bigger. All right, let's leave the dusty plains behind and, plunge into the world under the waves. The logic here is just as straightforward, drawing a really clear line between what's considered clean and what's not. Verse 9 lays it out plain and simple. For any water creature to be clean, it has to have both fins and scales. Just picture a salmon in your mind, right? It's shimmering with scales and it's using its fins to swim. That's the perfect image of a clean fish. But then verses 10 through 12 define everything else, like a catfish with its smooth skin, or a shrimp in its shell, or an eel, as an abomination. Now, that sounds like a really strong word, but in this context, it just means something that's ritually impure and set outside the boundaries of their diet. Okay, so now we look up from the water and into the sky. And for birds, the approach is a little different. Instead of a simple two-part rule, we get a specific list of creatures to avoid, basically a lineup of the sky's most formidable players. Verses 13 through 19 really do read like a dramatic movie montage of these powerful, often predatory birds. Picture the eagle, the vulture, the raven, the owl. These are the masters of the sky, and a lot of them are associated with scavenging and death. And then, at the very end of the list, we get a surprise entry, the bat. Now, we know it's a mammal, but from their perspective, it was a creature that flew, and it was clearly marked as unclean. Then we get to flying insects. Verse 20 gives the general rule, most flying things that also crawl around on all fours are off limits. But, and this is so fascinating, verses 21 and 22 give this one specific exception. If an insect has jointed legs that are specifically designed for leaping, just picture a grasshopper with its powerful back legs all coiled up like springs, then it's actually permitted to be eaten. That one ability to spring up from the earth changes everything. And that brings us to our final category of animals, the creatures that creep and crawl on the ground. This is where we really start to see just how deeply this system of purity and separation was woven into the fabric of everyday life. Verses 24 and 25 spell out the consequences in black and white. If you touch the dead body of any of these unclean animals, you yourself become ceremonially unclean. Now, it's really important to understand this doesn't mean you're sinful. It's more like being in a temporary state of ritual impurity, a state that separates you from sacred spaces and activities and requires a specific fix. So, what was the fix? The process was super clear and practical. If you just touched an unclean carcass, you were considered unclean until evening. The sunset basically acted as a reset button. And if you had actually carried the carcass, you also had to wash your clothes, a physical action to signify a return to ritual purity. Verses 29 through 31, and then again in 41 and 42, paint a pretty vivid picture of these unclean, creeping things. You've got creatures that scurry around in the shadows and live close to the dirt, the mole, the mouse, different kinds of lizards. And then it lays down a broader rule against anything that crawls on its belly, like a snake, or anything that has a whole bunch of feet, like a centipede. The theme is pretty clear, a separation from creatures that are low to the ground, in the dust. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This state of ritual uncleanness could actually spread. Verses 32 through 38 explain that if a dead, unclean creature fell onto anything, a wooden bowl, a piece of clothing, even an oven, that object also became unclean. Just imagine a gecko falling into a clay water pot. Because the pot itself is porous, it couldn't be cleaned. It had to be broken, and whatever was inside was now unusable. It just shows how seriously this whole principle of separation was taken. And this next part is a brilliant illustration of the core principle here. Verses 39 and 40 clarify that even a clean animal, one you're totally allowed to eat, becomes a source of uncleanness if it dies on its own. This is the light bulb moment. It tells us the ultimate issue isn't just about what species an animal is, it's about maintaining a profound separation from death itself. That is the key distinction being made throughout this whole chapter. So that brings us to the end of the chapter. Because after all these incredibly specific details about animals, the text zooms way out and finally gives us the ultimate purpose, the grand why behind it all. So after that whole detailed tour of the animal kingdom, we have to ask the big question, right? Why? What is the point of all this careful separation, all these distinctions? And here it is, the answer, in verse 44. This was never primarily about health or hygiene, even though that might have been a nice side benefit. The reason is theological. God says, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." And holiness simply means to be set apart, to be distinct, to be dedicated for a sacred purpose. The goal was for the people's everyday lives, even what they ate, to reflect the very character of their God. Verse 45 ties this command directly to Israel's origin story. God reminds them, hey, I'm the one who rescued you from slavery in Egypt. That incredible act of salvation wasn't just a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the entire foundation for this call to be a unique and separate people. Their freedom came with a purpose. And the final two verses, 46 and 47, just summarize the entire chapter perfectly. This is the law, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. These rules were like a daily training tool. Every single meal became a hands-on lesson in seeing the world differently and making careful distinctions, just as God distinguishes between what is sacred and what is ordinary. So, the crucial takeaway is this. Leviticus 11 isn't just some ancient menu, it's a profound spiritual exercise woven right into the fabric of everyday life. It was a constant reminder 3 times a day at every meal that they were called to be a people defined by holiness, a people set apart for God.